Chapter 6. When Anne and the girls returned to the house, it was late evening. She had survived her first car ride, which had been disorienting, been fitted for intimate apparel, which had been nigh mortifying, been given a crash course on modern markets and introduced to foods for which she had no name and had to learn how to eat to boot. This is not to say she did not enjoy the outing. It was just beyond her experience. She was thoroughly exhausted by the time she climbed the stairs and was ready to fall into bed. But first she had things to put away. Roulette offered to help her, and she accepted gratefully. Before she could follow them, Liberty's phone went off. She stepped out onto the front porch to answer it. There was one thing the outing had convinced Anne of, though. The need to remain here under the O'Keefe hospitality for a while yet. It had proved to her that she was not yet capable of functioning on her own. "Hey, looks like Shannon's been in here," Roulette smiled when they entered the room. "There's something on the bed for you. I'll just put these in the wardrobe." "Thank you," Anne answered, concentrating to remember the direction and the path to the bed, determined to do it without help. Over the course of the day, Roulette and Liberty both had learned when to help her and when to let her fend, for which she was grateful. When her hands found the edge of the bed, she felt across its broad linen surface. Up near the pillow, she found a soft bundle of cloth, which she unfolded. The air was filled with the scent of something comforting and familiar. It smelled of Irish summer, the summerlands, of Faery. She sat on the edge of the bed, held the object to her face, and breathed deep. As she did so, it unfolded in her hands, spilling the fabric and its contents across her lap and onto the floor. "Oh, I'll get that," Roulette said, moving to pick up whatever it was that had fallen. "These are beautiful," she breathed. "I haven't seen embroidery like this in my life, not even from Japan. And that cloak is amazing." "What?" Anne's voice broke, and she tried again. "What are these things, please?" "Well," Roulette began, laying out each piece for Anne to run her hands over them. "This one is a heavy linen blouse, full sleeves and high lace collar the way you like. There's embroidery on the sleeves of eagles. Oh, I think that one's a squirrel. It's really clever. White thread on white fabric. This one is like it, but lighter, with very pastel threads. I think it's a forest done in knotwork on the sleeve and collar bands. I don't know what this is made out of." Anne reached over and fingered the fabric, smiling softly. "Cobweb." Roulette was quiet for a moment, then busied herself with the rest. "This one is a tartan vest in blues and greens, a bodice really. Should fit you nicely. And there is a matching skirt in what feels like wool, but is just too soft. You'll need to save these for winter. A scrap of buttery leather and a shawl," she said, picking up the last object in question, and gasped. Anne's hand went out and slid through the beaded tassels at the end of the shimmering black lace. "That one's not so fine," she smiled. "I'm not as good with the fairy materials as with mortal, and nowhere near the princess's skill level." The image of a beautiful, innocent face looking up at her beneath a crown of golden braids came to her then, warmed her heart. "Nonsense! It's beautiful. And the cloak, that'll be warm come winter. It's as soft as suede, but I know it's material. The color of midnight. So what's in the box?" Anne let Roulette take the cloak, looked up where her face should be. "Box?" Just behind you, in the middle of the base of the pillows. Beautiful wooden thing." Anne turned, felt across the spread until her fingers came into contact. She pulled it towards her, set it on her lap, let her fingers run across the deeply carved surfaces. The other things, the clothing, she knew those were hers. This was new. Something she had never seen. She imagined that the fine, silk-grained wood was impossibly beautiful to the eye, but her fingers found it even more so. There were details within the details that only her fingertips saw. It was not a large box, and only a handspan deep, the kind of box one would keep jewels in. She had never owned jewels, only the silver crucifix she had been given for her confirmation, and that had disappeared a century or more ago, and she'd never given it another thought. The box had sounded empty when she moved it, but it didn't feel empty. Her thumbs slid along the upper edge of the front of the box, looking for the latch. There wasn't one, but the tiny triquetra just under the rim felt different. She pressed it, felt it shift a little and twisted. There was a soft click, and the lid raised slowly on its own. There was a waft of rain on meadows and mild sun on flowering fields, a tingling breath of wind through oak leaves and rowan, and the feel of rising mist at twilight that rose up from within. It caressed her face like a lover or a tender parent, enveloped and settled into her. She took a long, deep breath, closed her eyes. A voice she knew but could not place sounded in the depths of her mind, setting off small implosions like mental fireworks. The voice was large and warm and musical. A man's voice. A lion's voice. A king's voice. And suddenly she knew him, remembered the fair face beneath golden brows and the eyes the colour of a summer sky.
For all that has been done to you, I grieve for its necessity. For all you have given, I honour your sacrifice. I give you now what I could not give you then, else you would not have left and things would not go well in the coming seasons. Each of the children has given you a gift.
She felt them, tiny sparks of light and energy, like miniature stars, rise from the box and steal into her body. She could taste each of them, knew which came from which as easily as she could distinguish their voices in the dark.
The last gift is mine.
This one exploded within her, hot and golden, cooling quickly to something bearable. It settled into her limbs and raced back to her head, piercing and filling the empty holes, doing something to the fog left placeholder. The breath she had not known she'd been holding slipped from her lungs. All the energy seemed to drain from her body, and she slid to the floor in a breathless heap. She became conscious to the sound of voices. She was on the bed, in a cloud of softness, laying carefully on the covers. She remained still, eyes closed, assessing the damage. Aside from a slightly aching head where she had no doubt hit the floor, and a faint burning sensation behind her lids, there was none. But she was fully aware that something had changed. "I don't know," Roulette was saying. "She had that box in hand when I turned to hang up her cloak. I heard something and turned, and she was on the floor, and that box was laying open like a suspicious spindle next to her." The sound of claws on wood. "Is she all right?" Liberty. "She's breathing now," Roulette sighed. "More than she was a minute ago." Ian's voice, hard like an eagle's, clipped.
Fairy gifts are hard on a body.
"Fairy?" The girls chimed. "But which?" Liberty asked. "Were it a poisoned apple from a jealous queen, or a reward for faithful service? And don't they usually give those afore they send you on?" Ian did not answer.
Where'd the box come from?
Roulette sounded like she'd shook her head. "It was on the bed when we got back. She seemed surprised by it, though she knew some of the clothes. That was what was in the other bundle. Looked like the clothes were sparking memories, but the box, she didn't know it."
How did it get here's the question.
The griffin growled. "That would be my fault, laird," came the voice from that morning, the growling stomach. She heard Ian turn, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, every inch an ancient chieftain.
Explain.
"I was charged to bring her out, gi'n a pack that were hern. We were chased by the hunt. I think it was a fluke they caught our scent. I don't think we were the object of the hunt, just convenient prey. I lost track of her after I took on the hounds." His voice told her he blamed himself for that. "You fought with that pack on Midsummer's Eve," Liberty commented. "Why'd you not get it to her afore, or at least afore now?" "Truth be told, miss, I forgot it were there. I put it on her billet this morn, thinking it might be a private matter for opening."
So this be from the king?
Ian asked, his voice beginning to lose its sharp edges. "Aye, laird, sent for in my presence and prepared by prior order." All this rang true to Anne as she tried to move her body. It took effort, but she turned her head. It was less effort to open her eyes. What she saw drew a shocked gasp from her lips, and all eyes turned to her. Before her and by the bed, she saw a humanoid griffin in dark green trousers that left room for his twitching tail, and a green shirt that hung open over an invisible undershirt. In his talons was a glowing box, now closed, which he set aside even as she turned to the next person in the room. On the edge of the bed, by her knee, was a gypsy girl, glowing fiercely at the edges, with sparks of lightning in her hair. Beyond Ian stood a marionette with a crown of growing things intertwined in her copper hair. Anne could tell she wore a dress of some sort, but could only see where it covered, all other details lost to the fog. What stood past drew her eye even more than the griffin man in the green man's crown, or the flower queen with her shocked but wooden face. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, but somehow not hulking. His dark brown hair fell about his shoulders with locks obscuring one steel-blue eye as he sheepishly looked up at her from beneath them. There was a sword on his back that seemed to burn to be free. It occurred to her then that she had seen those eyes once, some 20 years past, peering out of a visor, as he and a small group of newly polished recruits were presented before the king by his favorite general. As with Liberty, she could not see his clothes beyond knowing he wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled past his elbows and a kilt. Ian's voice of concern drew her attention back.
Lass?
I can see you, she breathed, struggled to sit up. Taloned hands moved to help her, sitting her up against the headboard. Roulette moved like lightning to arrange the pillows behind her. I'm fine, but... She frowned, glancing down at herself. Now that's disconcerting. I'm floating. Floating? Liberty puzzled. I can't see the bed then. I am on the bed. I? A soft came from Ian.
Tell me what you can see.
She leaned back, looked around to obey. You, not fully griffin, but enough. The ladies a dull and lightning, and the Highlander hovering over yon. Odd, though, I can see your clothes and roulettes, but not Liberty's or the gents. She glanced down again, blushing, or my own for that matter. The Scot suddenly vanished, presumably behind the doorway. I can see you've summat on, she almost growled. Just no detail. The Scot reappeared, though by the arms crossed over his chest he was still uncertain. She cast her gaze to the rest of the room. I can see something hovering on that wall, but only partly, like summat's in the way. They're likely clothes. And the box in the air there. She pointed to where a nightstand should go. Ian nodded knowingly.
Faesight.
He glanced at the box.
He must have treasured you fine to have gone to such lengths.
She saved his children. Ian's head whipped back to the doorway, then turned to her.
You dinna tell me that bit.
Skye nodded his head. I learned. The governess, he said, nodding his head in On's direction, gave her eyes to protect him and damn near her life. On felt embarrassed. He was making more of it than there was. I merely ran. I fought nothing. I drew the creature off from the wee ones. I weren't fast enough. Is anyone else noticing she's been speaking English this whole time? Liberty demanded, her fists on her hips. Something in her wooden face told On she knew how uncomfortable with the subject she was getting and had changed it deliberately. It only worked marginally, as attention was still on. Something else from the box? Roulette asked. On shook her head. She didn't think so. Not completely. I knew the tongue of Fora went beyond. I merely forgot, she shrugged.
And now you remember?
Ian asked pointedly. I was beginning to remember bits. The ladies have been helping by translating. I was piecing it together, but many things only half remembered are clearer now. There was something hopeful in his eagle's eye.
Your name, perhaps?
She shook her head sadly. Alas, I lost that a century ago. Surrendered it for Nan and Muntior and, of course, Panan Ceobran. Ian began to draw the others with him, away from the bed.
All right, the lass has had a trying day and...
We only took her shopping, Liberty protested.
Aye, I've been shopping with you, lass. She's like fair shot. Now out!
Wait, On said, barely able to raise her voice to be heard. Commander, I'd spake with you a moment. Then if Roulette or Liberty would help me dress for bed? Aye, Liberty began, then seemed to remember something vital. Bloody... Roulette, can you manage? I came up to tell you Tori called. There's some trouble at the bar. I'll have to go down. Da, we'll need a wee talk beforehand. There was a meaningful look exchanged between the two of them as he nodded. I got this, Roulette said, dismissing the matter. She stepped aside to allow On a private moment with Skye, moving to the wardrobe to fetch her the old-fashioned eyelet nightgown they'd found for her. Skye crossed the room to her bedside, helped her to sit up as she held her hand out to him. She did not get off the bed, but held onto his hand a moment, squeezed. Commander, I am terribly sorry for what I've cost you. I realise now I'm the reason you had to leave. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. He gave her what she took for an indulgent smile. Lass, I've not left. I've just been reassigned is all. Your safety is my charge. She groaned at that thought. But here is not there, she insisted. Battlefield venues change, and I don't begrudge you the duty. Now you should rest. With that, he turned and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. For the next few weeks, Anne drifted about the house, trying to learn the patterns, to avoid the furniture she still couldn't see, and establish some sense of autonomy. If she couldn't manage to navigate the house without a constant assistant, she could never expect to make her own way, and she feared she was on the cusp of taking advantage of Ian's hospitality. Primarily, she needed something to do, something of worth. She felt lost without a purpose. She awoke in the middle of the night, uncertain of the time. She slipped on her dressing gown and tried to puzzle through the Braille primers that had been thoughtfully procured for her, but nothing was clicking. She was just restless. Going back to sleep was not an option. Finally, she dressed in one of the lightweight, ankle-length skirts Liberty and Roulette had bought her, and one of the silky, nearly sheer blouses, her modesty protected by the bodice-like vest that matched the skirt. She could feel some kind of embroidery on it, but could not fathom the design. She left her hair in the side braid she always put it in for bed. It did not matter that the house was likely dark at this hour. She lived in the dark. She navigated the stairs easily enough with the rail, stepped into the back hall of the house. She was starting to be able to tell where she was by the sound of the floors. It was all polished hardwood, and some of the rooms creaked differently than others. She walked down the hall, trailing her fingers along the wall, counting doorways. She was coming to know the hallways by various scents, too. Shannon, the head housekeeper, had taken to putting certain flowers in certain places. Always roses in the back west halls, carnations in the east wing, and roses and lilies together in the front. Tonight, as expected, the house was mostly quiet, but she could hear faint noises from the back halls and followed first her ears, then her nose, to the scent of bread preparation. She had never been back here before, but knew immediately that she had found the kitchen. "Hello?" she called, seeing only the empty grey that filled her vision until something magical crossed it. "Oi, lass, what are you doing out of bed?" came the frumpy, motherly voice of Martha. She heard her setting something on a board near her, the rustle of an apron cleaning hands, and smiled. "I couldn't sleep any more. I'm not intruding." "No, you just caught me at starting the dough. There'll be soda bread for breakfast and cherry almond scones for tea." "Sounds positively homesick." "Homesick?" Anne shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I put it that way, but the smell—" There was a knowing tone in the woman's voice. "Smells'll do that to you. Take you home. Like nothing else for the memory. Have a seat on you, like. Can you find the table? 'Tis but straight across." "I'll manage, thank you." "I've some coffee on for myself, but if you like, I can spare you a cup," she offered. Anne shook her head as she reached out with her hands, taking cautious steps forward. "I've no love of coffee." "Thank you," she added, as if forcing herself to say it and slightly embarrassed by it. "Forgive me, I'm out of the habit of thanking." "I'm of the understanding you don't thank the fair folk. I've had a few of the touch such as yourself under my wing a time or two. Mind the cat," she added, her voice beginning to turn around just as a suction-sealed door opened and a waft of chill filled the room. Anne tried to mind her step, making sure not to pick her feet up so not to step on the animal. "He's a right annoyance, but he keeps the mice and the puck out of my pantry. Thankfully, he leaves the brownies alone." Her voice had a strange echo to it, as if she had her head in something. Anne's foot slid against something furry, which reacted by leaping not away as she expected, but the exact perfect direction to trip her. Her hands went out in front of her to catch herself, and she found the cold stove. She managed not to do any damage to herself or the cat until her hand brushed against something on the stovetop that burned as if it had been red hot. She jerked her hand away with a hiss, took a half step back, and fell against a pulled-out chair, tumbled awkwardly into the seat. "Lass, you all right?" Martha bustled over, fretting like a mother hen. "Oh, thank heavens I left that chair out from getting down my stash of dried cherries." "Shoo, you wee monster!" she cried, flapping her apron at the cat, who obediently fled. "Nothing too bad, I hope." She paused as she saw Anne nursing the back and side of her hand. "Nothing sudden, how'd you? Oh, you great fool," she snapped at herself, taking Anne's hand in hers and examining it. "None of you usually come in here, so I didn't put the iron away." "You iron while you bake?" she asked, gasped as the woman slathered something cold and slimy on the burn. No, child, the skillet. It's cast iron. It's your holy water. Anne was confused. My holy water? Haven't they taught you nothing yet? Vampires, they burn when they touch holy water or crosses. The fair folk and those they've touched react poorly to iron. Cold iron is worse. Lucky you that was cast. Lord knows the master keeps a bit of cold iron around the house somewhere for emergencies, but only cast iron down here. I like that skillet. 'Twere my grand's, so I ain't likely to be rid of it. Not usually a hazard on the back burner, but then I wasna taking a blind girl and an infernal Tom into account. Anne had no choice but to let the woman fuss over her. Half an hour later, after tea and biscuits, her hand had stopped hurting and she was able to escape the kitchen while Martha attended to her soda bread. She headed towards the front of the house. There was a sitting room where she had left a braille copy of a book she knew by heart. It might help her to learn the feel of the letters better. She counted doorways and turns and smelled for the roses and lilies. She heard voices before she smelled the flowers and slowed down. They were masculine voices, some angry, some distressed, all kept at a low tone she could not understand from this distance. She tread softly, trying not to disturb them, hoping they were in one of the other 3 rooms off the atrium and not in the little solar she was headed for. Her luck held. They were in the larger of the 3, something Roulette had called a living room, where they had one of those television boxes, a large array of couches, and a fireplace. From the sound of it, there were 2 Irishmen, an American, and an Englishman, and the Englishman was the one under duress. She glided past like a ghost, reaching for the doorway just beyond it when she felt a twinge in her chest. She stopped, pressed her good hand against her breastbone, frowning. It didn't feel like indigestion. Ian's voice cut clearly through her distress. You didn't approach the Cossack? No, sir. He came to me, and me snatched off the street like, shoving that fancy car of his. That pain again. Maybe it was a reaction to the speaker? Why'd you go and tell him who you worked for, Chatham? Someone growled. Anne recognized the voice as belonging to Reggie, Ian's right hand and heir. I didn't bloody have to. Had me dead to rights, he did. No twinge. Truth. She stopped. How had she known? One of the gifts? Yes. It tasted like eagle feathers and lily water. She started to continue to the solar, to ignore the interrogation she was certain was neither legal nor her business. The next exchange nearly robbed her of her breath. Did you tell him anything important? Like regarding my daughter's business? Ian snapped, at the end of his tether but on the verge of leniency. No, I didn't, sir. On me mum's grave, I swear. What I did tell him was months out of date. Told him you don't confide me much. Lie, her senses screamed. She stopped, made up her mind, and turned back to the door, stepping just into the frame. Within she could see Ian and Reggie, both mostly human. Ian was leaning on the back of something she could not see. Begging your pardon, Mr. O'Keefe, she said, bobbing a curtsy and trying her best to look like the help. Someone came towards her but was called off, perhaps with a gesture. I'm a little busy, Miss Anne. Can it wait? He said, trying to be kind and polite, but something in his voice reinforced her impression that she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm afraid not. She shifted to Irish. Does the Sassenach speak? She asked pointedly. Something crossed Ian's face at that, alerted to something in her manner or her features. Nay. Be brief. She took a deep breath, praying she was right. He's lying to you. Ian went from halfway across the room to looming in front of her in what seemed to have been a single stride. His hands on her arms were gentle, but firm. How do you know? She shook her head. I'm not entirely sure. The gifts, I think. When he said he was taken off the street, I felt it here, she said, touching his breast. When he said he told them lies, it near sucked the breath out of me. Truly hurt. Forgive me, Chief. I'd no intention of eavesdropping. I was just going to the solar for a book I'd left there, and then it hurt, and I had to listen. It didn't hurt when he said he didn't have to tell them who he worked for, just the rest of it. I know in my soul he's lying something awful. I don't know what's going on, and I don't have to know. I was just dead certain that if I didn't tell you what I knew, something terrible would happen. His hand moved up to her shoulder, fully taloned now. His anger was coming off of him in waves, but he maintained his outward calm. It wasn't aimed at her.
I intend this man no harm,
he said, not taking his raptor brown eyes off of hers. She felt that pressure again, returned his fierce stare. Aye, but you do. If I'm telling you true, I'm guessing you'll kill him. And rightly so for threatening your family. Just bear in mind you not get caught. These people need you with your neck unstretched. At that, Ian laughed, his talons becoming more hand-like.
They don't hang people anymore, lass. But thank ye. Get you on to your book, but take it to your room, mind. I'll be up later to have a word with you.
She curtsied again, switching back to English. Thank you, sir. I'll take care of it right away. As she felt her way to the solar, she heard his knuckles crack as he re-entered the room and closed the door behind him. She found the book fairly quickly, feeling her way from chair to chair to the table she'd lain it on. Her fingers drifted over the spine, swiftly told her she had the right book, and she left again, a little more sure of her position in the room. As she reached the staircase, Reggie came out of the living room, looked up at her with confusion on his face, then headed out the front door. Anne drifted back upstairs to her room, curled up in the overstuffed chair in a corner by the window, and ran her fingers across the bumps on the page, reading aloud to herself as if to confirm she was reading it aright. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show.